revitalization efforts is part of the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the Credits First Nation, and that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. In addition, Waterfront Toronto acknowledges that Toronto has historically been a gathering place for many Indigenous people, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples today. So having said that, moving forward, I also want to welcome Alicia Valenti to the board, who's a new director appointed by the province. Thank you for agreeing to serve at this important time as part of the corporation. We appreciate it. And I'm not sure that Councillor Joe Cressy is on the line this morning, but he's also been reappointed for another term. So we thank Joe for his continued work. So the next item on the agenda is a motion to approve of the meeting agenda. So can I have someone move that?
I'll move that, Steve.
Thank you, Kevin, and that's seconded by Jeannie.
Steve, can I just comment on that?
This is a very controversial.
No, I know, but we may have to be flexible. I did tell Jack and Kevin have to leave before 12 o'clock. We definitely need Jack here for the IREC discussion. Right. So if we have to, if we're running tight, we might flip a couple agenda items.
Okay,
so
that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. Okay, so hopefully we'll be able to move forward. So as I said, we've now approved the motion. There's now the next issue is the conflicts of interest. So I just wish to indicate, as I've indicated previously, that with respect to Quayside, I do have a conflict of interest as I've been involved in partnerships not involving this project or anything in the waterfront with a number of the proponents. So I'll not be participating in any of the IREC discussions. Is there anybody else who has any conflicts?
I also have one, Steve. I have a consulting relationship with one of the proponents as well. I spoke to George yesterday, and in the minutes reflected that I have a real estate development partnership with one of the proponents, which I do not. So I've asked them to correct those minutes from the last meeting. It is a financial markets consulting agreement, which specifically excludes any discussion around Waterfront Toronto as well. So.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Alicia?
I have a conflict on the 11th Parliament acquisition.
Great. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, we all here today just want to make it clear on the record that we are respecting all applicable health guidelines moving forward. So there is the consent agenda that we put out ahead of time, which highlights the items that we're addressing today. It's expected that people can read that. It gives the highlight of the key messages, but it serves as a summary of what's under discussion. What I'd like to do now is ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the open session of our last October 7th board meeting.
So moved.
Jack? Leslie, thank you.
Sorry, just note that we'll change it as per the comment that Kevin made.
Right. Correct. Okay. Okay. Minutes as revised.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. So I'm now going to turn the floor over to George, who will give us the CEO report. There's a few highlights. Yesterday we were at, by the way, an opening of the bridge, and George took some of my comments ahead of time, so I'm going to steal a little bit of his thunder. One of the great things that you'll hear George talk about is the Auditor General came out with her report, and she did do an update on Waterfront Toronto, and we basically got a gold star for everything we're doing. Yay. So George, now I'll turn it over to you.
Right. I'm going to take most of it as read, so I'll just address a couple points. The COVID return to work, I think I briefed the board. We've returned, management started back in September. All staff are back since October, 2 days a week. We will continue that in through March. Obviously, we continue to monitor public health's advice with regards to the new variant and any adjustments. So we're very operational, but we will be conscious of any health risks and always working with our joint health and safety committee, which has our staff. I do want to mention, we are also doing, and I've updated the board on our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Number of things underway, but we also have M&P who've engaged board members, staff members, et cetera, around doing some baseline assessments first with regards to how many staff do we have in different categories. So we need to establish that baseline so that we can monitor progress in the future. The other thing we're measuring is to look at who do we engage with. We have a very positive reputation about engaging the public, but we want to make sure that we're reaching out to all voices in the public. So that's part of the discussion. And we're seeking a baseline on that aspect as well. Who do we engage with? And who should we be looking to improve engagement with? So, the third item really is to take those two baselines, provide recommendations to us in terms of advancing. The other thing that we did also do is we're doing a survey. I think one of the board members asked about staff's input with regards to the return to work. As I said, they are part of the Joint Health and Safety Committee that helps guide us. But we're also doing a survey with regards to an upcoming decision we have to make on our office space, which needs to occur probably in the spring. So one of the things that we're surveying is what are the preferences of staff? What's the mix likely to look like in terms of a hybrid going forward? And we'll monitor that and adjust it, but we do need to understand how we want to, how much space we want to acquire, and how do we want to maybe reform that space into more collaborative space, but smaller space. So that's underway as well. Steve did steal the thunder on the Auditor General's report, but I was gonna just pass it to Lisa because I just want people to understand what she reported on and only take a minute.
Okay, sure. And thanks, George, and good morning, everyone. So in terms of the gold star, some of you guys will recall that in 2018, we were the subject of very detailed value from the audit by the Auditor General. We got 22 action items that we were required to implement. As part of the practice of the Auditor General, there's a continuous follow-up on the previous recommendations. And in fact, the Auditor General dedicates an entire chapter on status of previous recommendations. So the report issued last week, we wanted to share some positive news about the gold star. And really there's three things that were identified in this chapter, this follow-up chapter. The first was that the report identified several organizations which were recognized as being better at implementing the recommendations of the Auditor General, and Waterfront was one of these. The second is that the Auditor General notes that of the organizations who self-assess themselves as having fully implemented their recommendations, the Auditor General tends to agree with less than half of those organizations. With Waterfront Toronto, she agreed with us, and we, as we had fully implemented ours.
So just to clarify, she agreed with 100% of our
own assessment. Yeah, that's right. And third and lastly, the Auditor General likes to list the audited organizations by implementation status, and Waterfront Toronto was tied for first with respect to our implementation status of 91%. So overall, this is a great example of our continued and methodical approach that we have to implementing the Auditor General's recommendations. We thought it was important to share that with the board.
So the only last thing, I don't know if anybody had questions on that, sorry. The last item that I'll just touch on, Steve identified this, and maybe Charmaine, if we can just, I think we have pictures from yesterday. We received our third bridge, and we had Julie DeBrosen, who's the Member of Parliament for Toronto Danforth and the Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Natural Resources, and also Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. We had Amarjot Sandhu, who's the Parliamentary Assistant to the Ontario Minister of Infrastructure. We had Mayor Gontori, and we had Councillor Paula Fletcher, in addition to myself and Steve from the board. So the event went quite well. We had mostly television media. We didn't have much, I don't think, camera and print media. But I thought the event went quite well, Steve. So I don't know if you want to just comment. I thought.
Now, if you go to the previous picture, you get a free coffee if you can pick George and I up. No, it went well. It was a cold morning.
It was snowing. So.
Yeah. Cameron, did it get on the CP24 or anything?
Yeah, CP24 picked it up. CBC ran it twice. In another matter, there was a very big community meeting around what we're doing in the Portlands and the Gardner Expressway, and that was recognized by both Paula Fletcher and Councillor Bradford as a big milestone. So that was good too. So it did get coverage, and we're going to do a media wrap both on the broadcast and what happened on social.
Right.
So send it around.
Okay.
That's it, Steve.
And congratulations, George, to everyone at Waterfront on the implementing the recommendations of Waterfront. That was a real coup. Of course, if the report was negative, it'd be in the media, but because it's positive, it won't. Which is usually the case. I'd like to move on. We're now dealing with the reports of each of Farm, IREC, and Human Resources and Stakeholder Relations. All these reports are taken as read, but I just want to ask each of the chairs. Kevin, is there anything that you want to say in the open session regarding the Farm report?
No, just very briefly, Steve, we met on the 25th. We had a very fulsome meeting. Went through 8 different items, 3 of which we'll talk with Lisa about here, and 4 or 5, excuse me, in the closed session. Corporation remains in very, very good liquidity position. We had a long, fulsome discussion about Portlands, the increased risks as we go through probably the most critical 4 months here between here and the end of March in terms of expenditures, finishing the excavation, on heightened alert about potential slippage, but still on budget and on time according to our independent monitor, but you know, maybe slightly higher flags that we're going to watch over the next quarter. I think we're going to go through a little bit of an update with you, or are we doing that next, or?
Shortly.
Shortly. First, we go through the chairs, and then we go through.
But you know, a good quarter, quite uneventful, other than the big projects that we're going to talk about. We had a good fulsome meeting. Alicia sat in for the first time, and all is in good shape.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Any questions of Kevin? Okay, moving on. Wendy, is there anything that you want to add to your report?
Steve, I just wanted to add that we have concluded all our new board director onboarding and orientation, and I wanted to thank all the new directors for meeting in person and for the time, and staff for wrapping that process up, and everything went very well. And also that Rose and her team have concluded their new reporting format, and that was well received. So that's it on our end.
Okay, great. Any questions of Wendy?
Steve, if I can just add, we continue to look at our orientation of new directors, so we will check back in to see if there's anything as people settle in that they would recommend that we could improve on. So that'll be an engagement later on.
Great. Okay, Jack, anything on IREC?
Really no detail that other than we're going to see a presentation on villiers this morning that the committee looked at and reviewed with the staff, and we're very busy, of course, with Quayside and other acquisitions that look forward to being able to publicly announce at some point.
Okay, great. Any questions of Jack? Okay, great. Moving on. Now we'll turn the floor over to David on the priority projects of the corporation.
Thank you, Steve. We are not going to take a lot of time to go through the photos. I think everyone's workbook. We do, however, have our latest drone video, which we think is appropriate to present, given that I was talking before going on the site recently. Get that started. It's hard to hear David.
Yeah, we can't hear you, David.
That's unusual for my career.
Charmaine's trying to type.
You know what, David, if that mic's not picking you up, Charmaine, you can hear us at the table? Anybody?
Yes, I can, George.
Okay. If you continue not to hear David, I'm going to just suggest you come to the table.
I'll do that. Charmaine, can we hit play on the video?
Okay, sure.
Here we we go. So you can see the Central River Valley. We'll come around to that at the end of the video. Cherry South Bridge foundations. The bridge is here. It's pretty spectacular, actually.
It froze.
Having some technical difficulties. It's a great video.
Charmaine, it's frozen, I take it?
It's frozen. I'll try to restart it.
So yeah, just get over here.
There it goes, David.
Okay, here we go. So the Atlas crane, we've seen Canoe Cove excavation has commenced, so we're moving the dock wall on the north side of Polson Slip. You can see the area of the Promontory Park South. We are beginning to strip those materials out of there to start doing park finishes in the spring, including the promenade along the dock wall where we're doing reinforcement. We've seen previously the fish video in the West Habitat Cove, so TRCA has done some fish monitoring, identified a few new species or a few species that haven't been in the Inner Harbor for some time. No substantial changes here other than work continues on Cherry Street. We've been putting pipes underneath the Keating Channel for water and sewer, and we'll be installing those along Cherry and Commissioners. Moving along the Keating Channel, just in the foreground of the picture coming up is the location for the new stormwater treatment facility for the Portlands right here. So some very deep shafts to collect and process stormwater. We've begun work in the sediment debris management area, relocating water main. We have now awarded the contract for the widening of the Don River, and that work will start imminently. You can see the video has been taken subsequent to the removal of the Gardner ramps. And then as we move north, we're just completing the risk management measures in the ice management area. The welding of the bridges has completed and we are pouring the deck. And as soon as that deck has been poured and stripped, the excavation will continue underneath the bridge to connect the elbow area, the river valley here, to the ice management area. In the Central River Valley, we are installing finishes. So there are large stones going in, the levee cores. You can see the river finishes include what are called fiber encapsulated soil lifts and wood structures, harvested trees and root wads, which create both fish habitat as well as the structure of the river itself. And then the great shot at the end of downtown.
Amazing. Wonderful.
Really?
So the entire area, when it's finished, is almost, I learned yesterday, it's the size of downtown Toronto.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a huge, huge piece of land. Or, yeah.
And it's interesting. I was talking to some individuals who've lived in the area and have been watching, and even individuals I was talking, actually meeting with some businessmen, and they were indicating when they fly into Porter, they get to see it and they're just amazed at the complexity of the project and the progress that's been made. So as I always give credit to the team, they've done a fantastic job, and I don't think people will. This is why hopefully in the spring we'll be able to take tours and take the media through so that they get a better appreciation of how complex and big this project is.
David, you said, at one point on flyby, you said the future site of the stormwater treatment. I thought that's what the one we won the design, architectural design.
We did, the one we won the design award for, the one that's completed, is the stormwater treatment facility for East Bayfront, West Donlands, and North Keating, and it's on the north side of the Keating Channel. This one is for the Portlands, and it's on the south side of the Keating Channel, but it will function, have the same function and purpose as the one on the north side. And we're not actually building the treatment facility right now, we're simply building the storage facility for the stormwater. It will be discharged in the Keating Channel. And as development happens over the course of the next number of years in Villiers Island, that stormwater treatment facility will be constructed. Then it's one of the future pieces of work.
Great, thanks, David.
Thank you.
Really well done.
Great.
Okay, moving on. We're now on to just some committee appointments, and I'm pleased to recommend Paul Kawaja to be appointed to the Human Resources Committee, and Alicia will come to IREC. And I know that Andrew's been on 2 committees, and so he's now asked to go on to 1, and I've asked that he sit on IREC as well, and he will come off Human Resources. So that's the committee makeup. We're now at a full complement of directors, and the committees are fully made up, so I'm very pleased with.
Do you need a motion for that?
No, I don't think so. Or do I need a motion? Okay, sorry. A motion that those recommendations be accepted.
Second.
Okay. I just thought I was a dictator.
Yeah, I know. That's for a moment there.
Yeah.
It was a lapse.
Okay. There was a lapse. Okay. Now we'll go on to Villiers Island Precinct Planning. So we did, I think Jack mentioned they did have a presentation of Villiers, and at this point, and we just saw what David was showing us, Villiers is the first part of the development of the Portlands. So Meg, can we turn this over to you?
Actually, I should put it, I think most of the board members were at the IREC meeting, so I'm not sure.
Not some.
No, there's some that weren't.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Meg's prepared to do it quick.
So just as a quick introduction, Jed and Aaron are going to take you through the slides that are in the deck very briefly and just really open it up for questions. We wanted to give you a little bit of background on Villiers Island. We'll be coming back to the board in the new year at some point with a more detailed plan and strategy around engaging federal, provincial, city governments on funding and project implementation. So we wanted to give you sort of a background history on it, some of the planning work that's gone on, the precinct planning, et cetera. So Aaron Barter, our Director of Sustainability and Innovation, is going to lead us off. And I think, Aaron, if you want to sit at the very front on the left, and you can, and is Jed online, I think?
He is, yes.
Excellent.
I am.
And Jed's our Director of Development Planning. So take it away, guys.
Great, thanks so much. So it's great to be here in person. As Meg mentioned, we are going to we're going to assume that this has been read, but we're going to hit on a few highlights quite quickly. And then we will return at a future date with more details on the implementation and specifically on the financial strategy as well. So I wanted to start with reminding everyone of the opportunity on Villiers Island. I think a few minutes ago was mentioned the scale. It's a truly unique city building opportunity that doesn't come around very often. And it represents a vision that was co-created with stakeholders and approved by Toronto City Council in 2017. So we have a very strong platform to be working off of. As Jed will share, the precinct plan is very much rooted in reality and the urgent priorities that we have in front of us right now, like housing, climate, more open space, and more. I'm sure maybe we can go to the next slide. Actually, go to the third slide. So consistent with Waterfront Toronto's approach over the last 15 years and our track record on economic development, we are focusing on how this project can help to grow specific sectors within Toronto's and Canada's economy, focusing in on clean tech, climate solutions, and creative industries, while also maximizing the value as a tourism asset. It will go above and beyond net zero carbon, becoming Canada's largest cluster of net zero carbon buildings, and responding to the City of Toronto's climate emergency, but also what we all listened to over the last few weeks at COP26. The plan shows more than 1,000 affordable housing units, exceeding 20% of residential GFA. And with unique cultural spaces and nationally significant parks and public realm, Villiers will draw people from across the city and around the region to the water's edge, as you've seen through the park designs as well. And as we will speak to in more detail in the future, these public outcomes are very much enabled by high quality public transit, and design work on the Waterfront East LRT extension is ongoing. So for some highlights on the planning context, I'll pass it to Jed.
Great, thanks, Aaron. Charmaine, if you could go to the next slide, please. I think more than anything, it's to understand that the Villiers Island Precinct Plan is nested within a fairly significant, robust policy context, including the Central Waterfront Secondary Plan, which was adopted by Council in 2003, and the Portlands Planning Framework, which was adopted at the same time as the Precinct Plan. And I think critical to understand, and this is true of all of the work that Waterfront Toronto does, the Central Waterfront Secondary Plan has 4 big moves that the Precinct Plan is consistent with, which are removing barriers and making connections, particularly to Toronto's waterfront, building a network of spectacular waterfront parks and public spaces, promoting a clean and green environment, and creating dynamic and diverse new communities. So if you could skip ahead to 2 slides, please. And so in support of all of that, and adopted with the Portlands Planning Framework, we adopted the Villiers Island Precinct Plan, which basically is the map for the big pile of dirt that we just flew by in Villiers Island. And I think critical to understand is the roads that are being created right now as a result of the flood protection work are New Cherry Street and Commissioner Street. And then we imagine a complete community being developed as a result of the flood protection work. If you could skip to the next slide, please. The precinct plan itself had a number of guiding principles and key elements, and we'll talk about the key elements very briefly in the next slide. But critical to understand is that this is the gateway to the rest of the Portlands development, and it really is setting the bar high for Toronto globally with respect to imagining new ways of building cities, particularly that are sustainable and are a mix of uses and hopefully a mix of incomes, with the commitment to build more than 20% of affordable rental housing. If you could go to the next slide, please. The key elements, there are a number of kind of contextual things that are worth noting. It's an island. We're building an island. And importantly, though, the north side of Villiers Island connects to the Keating Channel, which will also connect to a future new development in Keating East Precinct. It's, as Aaron mentioned, connected by transit and excellent pedestrian and cycle connections. And it's a complete island with affordable housing, a mix of residential and commercial, as well as key catalytic uses. So things that will draw the rest of the city and the world, we hope, to the island beyond just residential. And it's one that recognizes the industrial past of the city of Toronto. If you could skip to the next slide, please. The whole island itself fits within a very tight 5-minute walk, and will be home to just under 5,000 units or 10,000 people. There will be jobs, as well as the surrounding the island will be a series of spectacular parks, including a new river that's being currently excavated through David's work. If you could skip to the next slide, please. Critically, we're looking at creating a climate positive precinct. So kind of achieving the highest level of sustainability that we possibly could, maximizing solar gain, but also reducing car travel. We're heavily reliant on the new connection provided through the extension of the Queens Quay LRT. And with the idea that this is a community that will be a climate positive community. If you could skip to the next slide. And as I mentioned previously, there are significant parks surrounding the island. Villiers Park, River Park to the south that's being currently created, and Promontory Park south and north with what we're calling a catalytic use, so some kind of major regional draw on the west side of the island. If you could skip to the next slide. Broadly speaking, we have a series of excellent not only transit connections, but pedestrian, cycling, and trails that both extend around the island, but the idea is to have an island that is incredibly accessible for pedestrians as well as cyclists and transit users. Next slide, please. And Aaron, I'll leave it to you to round it off.
Great, thanks, Jed. I'll wrap up quickly and then we'll move to questions. So quite literally, the foundation for this project is being built right now through the work in Portland's flood protection project, and we have the approved plans that went to City Council in the fall of 2017. So what we are currently working on with the city and with Preto is an implementation plan and approach to realize the vision that you've just seen, including a detailed financial strategy. So I'll close with a few highlights on the next slide, Charmaine, where we have, just reminding you, 10,000 residents, 1.5 million annual visitors to those parks and catalytic uses, 3,000 permanent jobs, 5.5 million square feet of net zero carbon buildings, which is Canada's largest net zero cluster, nearly 30 acres of parks and public realm, and over 1,000 units of affordable housing. Looking ahead, we have, on the next slide, some work underway currently. The team is fully engaged on preparing a due diligence report that will detail all of the strategies and costs and implementation techniques to realize this vision, which we are aiming to have completed early in the new year. Our goal is to have a business and implementation plan that will go to Toronto City Council in Q2 of 2022. And this is all intended to bring us to a construction start following the completion of the flood protection project. And we currently have Q2 2025. All of that will produce a first occupancy on Villiers Island in mid 2028 based on this schedule. So I will wrap up and open up for questions.
So Aaron, before we take a question, just to point out how important the timing is, we want to make sure the land doesn't, after investing all that money, doesn't sit idle. So that's why we want to get started on the business implementation plan right away. We also want to get in front of council in Q2 because they have an election coming up, and by the time that election's over and council resumes, we will lose another year. So it's really important that we stick with, and we're with Preto in the city to advance that.
Can you remind us who owns the land at Villiers Island, and does anybody have more rights to dictate what we do there than any other level of government?
Well, there's a discussion on that. I'll let Meg, but about 53% of that land, I think, is owned by the city in Preto.
Yeah,
Meg.
Most of the land is publicly owned between ourselves, the city, and ultimately Ports Toronto or the federal government through the Lakeville that's happening. There will be some lands that confer upon them. The city does own the majority. There is a private developer who owns a midsection, quite a sizable chunk. And so we're been in constant negotiations with them to settle their appeals, et cetera, and continue to work with them. So I think that the coordinated effort is required because we have, public sector, 3 different public sector owners. And so we need to be, and we're working very closely with Preto and the city on all of the Villiers Island implementation planning and work that's going on right now to do due diligence.
There will be further discussion later on about the issues and the cooperation between the various levels.
I had a question to that point. Do we enter into an MOU or any kind of agreement, or is it just?
Basically, right now, there is an MOU that was, I think, 2.5 or 2.6.
2006.
It's up for renewal, and that's some of the things that are under discussion now with our various government partners, which we'll be discussing again in more detail on camera. Leslie?
I have a question about a couple of things. First of all, very exciting, great to see it, and the comment about complete communities. So this 10,000 residents is almost the identical size of St. Lawrence neighborhood, which has 2 schools, 1 community center, a library, a daycare center, and a whole range of other things that weren't mentioned. And I just want to understand at what stage or how are we accommodating for that completeness? Because affordable housing and rental is one thing, and parks is another thing, but there's this whole other stream that makes things complete.
I'm gonna let Jed respond because
Yeah.
he'll know in detail, but there are school sites, daycares will be required, all
Okay.
of that. So Jed, do you just want to talk about the community services aspect?
No, very briefly, Leslie, thank you for raising that. And in the interest of time, we truncated the fact that in terms of the complete community, yes, there is a community center and pool imagined, in addition to a school site that's been identified and daycare spaces throughout the neighborhood. And so we feel that this is a complete, and I would turn the board's attention to the precinct plan itself that itemizes all of the things that would be contained within the community.
Thank you.
I just want to indicate, actually, Leslie, you've raised a point that's, I don't know whether we'll be able to solve it here, but in creating complete communities, one of the problems that you have, for example, with school boards is they set aside land, but they don't get the money to buy it until the population is there. So you're trying to attract a population to move in, but the schools follow. Anyway, not that we'll be able to solve the problem, but I've been working on this with some other large projects, and it's something would be nice to be able to figure that out in a better way. I think the funding formulas need to be rethought. That's my personal comment on that. Sorry, Jeannie.
I wanted to ask Aaron and Jed, so we see the Villiers Island implementation timeline. Do we have an implementation timeline from the TTC? Because there's lots of great pictures about all the public transit, but what is their timeline? Hopefully
So I can just mention, the TTC, the city, and ourselves are actually working on 30% design. It was supposed to go to council. It's been delayed. I think it's going to be reported back with the Eglinton project in the spring. So hopefully in the next few months, we'll have a better assessment of what the cost will be, what the design will be, and then the next steps towards 60% design. And Steve, if I may, on the school board issue, we've been talking with the Deputy Minister of Education, who actually succeeded me when I was in that position, and talked about that issue. Because if people, and for our new board members, our Block 5 on Quayside is also designated with a potential school. So what we want is some assurance one way or the other. What's the decision? Do we leave it open or do we plan for a school? They are under, to your point, they're underserved right now as we continue to build that community. So their biggest problem is they don't have money to give to the school board. So they're going to try to work with us to advance that quicker.
Yes,
just could I say on that, George, I think we're well positioned by virtue of the tripartite arrangement, the three orders of government, to help escalate that. Yeah. I mean, to your point, there are 3 current school sites along the waterfront in the West Donlands, at Block 5 and Quayside, and in the Lower Yonge Precinct, all identified, none of them funded to actually be built. And here's an opportunity with our tripartite arrangement as part of the overall Villiers package to actually see one built. And I think that's well worth us keeping on our list, not just to identify it, but to seek the commitments as part of this.
Yeah, I think it's something, if we're, as Waterfront, trying to be innovative, I don't know whether we can ever make those changes, but it's something that's clearly warranted. I just had, are there any other questions? I just have one. In terms of the financial aspects of this and the due diligence, who's undertaking that part of it? Like, who's figuring that out?
Yeah, well, we're working with Preto and with the city. Actually, our staff are doing a lot of the work, but working with the other 2 partners. Just to make sure everybody agrees on the numbers that we're bringing forward. We've also hired some outside consulting support, which should give us really clear numbers by the end of January.
Okay, great. Okay, it's very exciting coming to fruition a little sooner. I've been here for a few years, so it's nice to see that this something that looked very far is coming closer to fruition. Great presentations. I'd like to move on. David, if you could bring us an update on the the Portlands Flood Protection Plan. I know that there will also be a risk update during the closed session, so we may want to leave any detailed questions for then, but maybe just go ahead, David.
Thanks, Steve. Charmaine, if we could advance to slide 75. So this is our current analysis of the estimate at completion. We do this work now every 6 months, re-estimate the project. We actually re-estimate the project every month, but every 6 months we will estimate the project, redo the risk register, and re-quantify the risks. So this is our second iteration of that process. The costs or our estimate in the last 6 months has increased by a net of about or just around $2 million, so not substantially. Our risk values have increased primarily due to the removal of opportunities from our risk register into the EAC. So overall, we are continuing to be on time and on budget, although, as Kevin mentioned, our risks, particularly on the schedule side, are, I won't say increasing, but becoming more more real and more timely. Those risks are now coming to the point where we're either able to mitigate them or they will begin to affect us.
That's on timing or timing and cost?
Timing.
Okay.
Timing.
So on that one, I think, David, just to clarify, one of the reasons for that is that the team's been very good. Every time we had cost pressures, we found ways to optimize and to juggle things. As the project goes further along, there are fewer things that we can optimize and juggle to accommodate timing issues.
And yeah, and we have fewer opportunities to reschedule, resequence the work, and our critical path, as we're working through this, our critical path is or could be affected by some of the work that's scheduled to happen in the next several months. And if it doesn't happen in a timely way, then there could be an impact to the completion date. If we go to slide 79. Thank you. Just of note, with respect to costs, last year at this time, we had unallocated contingency in the amount of $41 million. This year, the contingency amount unallocated is actually $43 million. So we've increased the contingency amount over the past 12 months. Essentially, all of the changes and tender results that we experienced in the last 12 months have been within the estimate and within the budget that we had forecast at that time. Moving on to slide 82. So in terms of our risk results, the results for this period are that the probability of achieving budget has reduced from 63% in the spring to 53% now. And while that sounds like a coin toss, it doesn't actually work that way. The closer we get to completion of tendering, the more sensitive the graph becomes. Essentially, the small moves in terms of the budget equal much larger percentage challenges and changes. I would note that with respect to actual dollars, 6 months ago, the consultants indicated that an additional $5.5 million of contingency would result in increase in probability to 75, back up to 75%. That same number applies this period. So an additional $5 million in contingency would increase our probability back to 75% from the 53%. On page 83, well, actually, before you do that, let's stay where we were. I would also like to note that we've looked at the schedule, and as mentioned, if some of the risks that we are monitoring and working on can't be mitigated, there's a potential for up to 6 to 8 month delay in substantial performance. That, from a monetary perspective, would be in the order of $4.5 million, just in terms of extended general conditions. So overall, both the schedule and the budget risk based on our risk assessment is in the order of about 10%, which is in the order of less than 1% of the total budget, given that we're dealing with a $1 billion budget. And in terms of the overall schedule, our performance metrics pursuant to the strategic plan, a successful project would be deemed to be within 5% of budget, so this project would apply, and within 6 months of original schedule. And again, we're tracking very close to that, which is not to say that we're going to rest on our laurels and allow that to continue or allow that to happen. But I just wanted to point out that in terms of the scale of what we're looking at here. In terms of, if we move to 83. Thank you. The chart here shows the, identifies the overall results at 30%, which is our budget stage, at 90%, which was last November. In our last 2 updates, you can see that the 5.6 million in additional contingency to get to 75% confidence. The estimated contingency available at the end of the project based on our current EAC is 31 million, and the probability at 53%. If we could then move to 84, and we talk about risks. The main risks that we face continue to be, from a budget perspective, the market and excess escalation, and soil disposal. As you can see, the top 4 risks are related to those categories. With respect to the market risk, we've actually reduced the risk that we were carrying since last report from a potential of $20 million to $10 million. We've had some very good tender results over the last 6 to 8 months. So we haven't actually seen the impact of those commodity increases on the project tenders that we've had. As Kevin alluded to, by the end of March, we will have awarded probably in the order of 98% of the total project. And certainly all of the large packages will have been awarded by that point in time. And at that point in time, we'll have essentially either realized or be able to retire our market risk. We will also be able to do that with respect to soils. We're about 90% through excavation. The river excavation will be completed in the next 2 months, and the team is currently working on an assessment of the soils, the quality of those soils from an environmental geotechnical perspective, and where we can reuse those soils. So we'll have a very good idea by the end of March, our total soil risk as well. So both of those risks we'll have a really good handle on in the next reporting period. In terms of some just overall comments, I mentioned that our overall risk from both a budget and schedule perspective in terms of cost is in the order of 10 million. Budget risk is in the order of 6 to 8 months, and that relates to we're looking at opportunities to mitigate that. That and actually is we had a very fulsome discussion of this at the Farm Committee. Even a 1 or 2 month delay in certain work that we're doing has the potential to delay the overall completion up to 6 to 8 months. And that has to do with the ability of, ability for us to have our planting established, because the planting is a very focal part of an important part of the structure of the river. So we need those plants to establish, the routes to take before we have the flows opened up to the river, so that we don't have erosion and the plants washing away and the banks of the river beginning to wash away. Having said that, the areas in question are very, very minor. It's just the 2 plugs at the west end and the north end. And so we're looking at opportunities now to mitigate those risks even further by potentially changing the way we're doing some of that work, wherein maybe it's possible that a 1 month schedule impact or 2 month schedule impact today would not translate to a 6 to 8 month schedule impact at the end of the project. So we're working very closely with the engineers on that solution. And then the last point, George made it a little earlier, we're at the point now where we really have done as much cost optimization as we can, both from a schedule as well as a design perspective. There's very little in the way of cost reduction we can do that wouldn't become scope reduction at this stage.
So the only other thing I would just say, relating this to the presentation we just had prior to this, construction of Villiers isn't projected to start till 2025. And we were targeting spring of 2024, so we have a little bit of slack. But as David said, trying to just stay on time, on budget, see where we're at.
We're lucky we don't need lumber.
Yeah, very little. It's all dirt and.
No, great job. Just remind me before I ask for questions, what percentage at the beginning did we allocate to our contingency as a percentage?
The overall percentage, including escalation, was 30%. I would note that the two biggest draws on our contingency have been escalation. Escalation has been in nominal or in actual dollars about 50% higher than estimated at due diligence. And the other is utilities, where we've incurred or allocated somewhere between 30 and 40 million of our contingency to pay for utility costs we weren't anticipating.
I think the other thing, Steve, just to add, as David pointed out, the soil remediation, even though we did lots of testing, until you're actually in, especially when you're into industrial lands on the water, right?
Yeah. No, great report, David. It's amazing in this environment to be doing as well as we're doing, keeping my fingers crossed and touch wood and all that. But it is amazing with what's going on in inflation and construction costs. Are there any other questions of David before we move on? Well done. Thanks, David. Okay, at this point, I'm going to ask for a motion to go into the closed session. And I just want to remind anybody that whatever we pass and close, we have to come back and open session to formally pass. So can I have a motion then to go into closed session?
So moved.
Okay, thank you. And Leslie? Great. Now that we're back in open, if you can put, there are 4 resolutions that we need to pass that are on the board before you. So could I have a motion to approve the October 7th board meeting closed session minutes? Mover and seconder, Andrew and Drew, thank you. All in favor? Carried.
Aye.
Motion to approve the fundating strategy and plan as detailed in the report presented to the board. Mover, Alicia and Leslie. All in favor? Carried, thank you. A motion to approve the draft rolling 5-year strategic plan, 2022-23 to 2026-27 as presented. Mover and seconder, Rule and Jeannie. All in favor? Thank you. And a motion to approve the purchase by the corporation of the parcel land described as substantially set out in the terms in the report provided at the meeting. Form of resolution, I think, is up on the board. We have a mover, Alicia.
I can't.
Oh, Alicia can't.
Leslie. I'm happy to move it.
Jack and Leslie second. All in favor? Carried. Okay, thank you.
I'm abstaining.
Okay, yeah, abstaining. So now we're going to, do I terminate now or motion to terminate the meeting?
You just finished your best. Yes, you can have your camera discussion. Sure.
Okay, motion to terminate the meeting. Jeannie and Alicia, thank you. The motion has been terminated. The meeting is officially terminated.